right, as we mentioned in the previous segment, President Donald Trump's accomplishments are already outlasting his presidency. You know, when you look at the courts, but I mean, there's so much more when you look at what he was able to accomplish over the last 4 years. And it was really the team he surrounded himself with. And I want to look at that. I want to look at some of the pro-life issues, the religious freedom issues, the economic issues. But one of the things, I played this clip already, but I'm going to play it again. President Biden blasting the 1776 Commission, which, by the way, I just want to, it's a 45-page report. They took it down off the White House website, but you can, it's at my website. You can go to tonyperkins.com. I just want to read to you just a couple of sentences from the conclusion. Among the virtues to be cultivated in the American Republic, the founders knew that a free people must have a knowledge of the principles and practices of liberty and an appreciation of their origins and challenges. An authentic civics education will help rebuild our common bonds, another word for unity, our mutual friendship, and our civic devotion. But we cannot love what we do not know. This is why civics education relating to the citizen must begin with knowledge, which, as George Washington reminds us, the surest basis of public happiness. Well, this is what President Biden had to say yesterday about the commission.
I'm rescinding the previous administration's harmful ban on diversity and sensitivity training and abolish the offensive counterfactual 1776 Commission. Unity and healing must begin with understanding and truth, not ignorance and lies.
Joining me now to talk about this, Dr. Ben Carson, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and also a member of the 1776 Commission. Dr. Carson, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's always good to be with you.
Your response to President Biden's comments about the Commission's work?
Well, it's pretty shocking that he would think it was controversial to teach the history of our country. You know, history gives you your identity, and your identity gives you your beliefs. And if you're going to go back and wipe history out or rewrite history, it's going to be very difficult for you to have strong convictions. And I think that's exactly what some people want, because they want to be able to sway people. And, some years ago, one of our leaders said, we're going to bring about a fundamental change of America. They didn't particularly like what America stood for, so they want to change it. And that begins with, altering what people are taught. And then in addition to that, we have a double whammy, because not only are they not teaching the history correctly, but they're imposing severe penalties if you dare to talk about something different. You become a racist, you become a white supremacist, you become all kinds of horrible things. And, it's causing people to kind of shudder in place and not be creative in the way that they think and what they do.
And that is the farthest from creating an environment that would lead to unity. I mean, you cannot have unity when you have people fearful that they're going to be labeled with something that would cause them to lose their job or lose their standing in society just because they believe differently than you do.
Yeah, the cancel culture is tantamount to tyranny, basically. And, it is being thrust upon us, and some people don't even recognize what's happening here. This is the kind of thing that we saw going on in communist countries in places like Cuba and banana republics. And here it is, full frontal, right here in the United States of America.
Yeah.
And people have got to wake up and recognize what's going on, because freedom is not free. You have to fight for it every single day. You cannot be the home of the free if you're not also the home of the brave.
Good point. When you were talking about the education aspect, I was thinking back to the novel 1984, and in that it says, "He who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future." Because as you said, understanding who you were as a people really will direct who you'll become. And we see this moving so rapidly. Are you surprised at how rapidly there is this effort to consolidate power and silence opposition by this administration?
Yeah, I would have never thought that it could happen that quickly. But they do kind of recognize that by going so quickly, they could stir up the people, and hence you see all of the military forces in Washington, D.C.
Troubling, very troubling.
Well beyond the inauguration.
Yeah.
And that's a harbinger of things to come, if the people allow it.
So let's talk about that, Dr. Carson. You are one who has faced many challenges in life, but you have overcome them. You've been successful neurosurgeon, successful in the political realm, successful in leading the HUD to take on and face challenges. So how does the average American, and I'm going to put a little closer or a little tighter definition, because most of our listeners are believers, they're followers of Jesus Christ. And in what we've seen unfold in the last 3 weeks, well, I would say probably last 3 months, but in particular the last 3 weeks, has left many of them shell-shocked and wondering the way forward. There is a way forward. We can overcome this, but what do we need to do?
Yes. There is a way forward. First of all, we have to remember our roots, the foundations of this country, the Judeo-Christian values systems that gave us the courage to fight for what we believed in, that caused us to be helpful to our neighbors rather than hurtful to our neighbors. They have completely changed things in this country. The vast majority of people in our nation are decent people. They will help someone in distress. They will help their neighbor. They don't ask them if they're Republican or Democrat.
Right.
And they're willing to tolerate differences. But what has happened is the politicians and the media have found that in order to enhance their power and the perception that they are needed, they stir up divisions. So they divide us into every possible category, by race, by income, by age, by religion, by whatever they can find. And then they tell each one of those groups that they are the savior. And by putting this on people constantly, people begin to believe that it's actually true.
Yeah.
And they begin to accept it. And I think what we have to do is go back to our foundation, the Bible. We go back to our belief systems, that all men are created equal, that God is no respecter of persons, that God is fair, that God is love. And we have to begin to reflect that. And we can't act like the other side does.
Yes, right.
Because if it's an eye for an eye, pretty soon everybody's blind, and nobody can see where they're going. And what we're doing now is we lurch from left to right and back to left and back to right. There's no forward progress. If anything, we're going backwards. And it's going to require somebody to be the adult in the room and to begin to talk about common sense solutions to our problems, to be able to sit down and have a real discussion without degenerating into name calling and some of the bizarre behavior that we're seeing right now.
So, Dr. Ben Carson, in your role at HUD, you began you were addressing a lot of the societal issues in terms of homelessness and the breakdown of the family, the results of that, and you were partnering with churches and the religious community. You opened the door to them, and I think you found them to be good partners.
Absolutely.
What role can the church play in what you just described about bringing back our recalibrating and getting our compass pointing true north again. What role can the church play in that?
The church can play a huge role. Alexis de Tocqueville came to America, the French observationist, and did an in-depth study of America because the Europeans were so fascinated with how this fledgling nation could be doing so well so quickly. And the big 2-volume set, but at the end of the second volume, he says one of the things that impressed them the most were the churches, and the preachers in the pulpit who didn't hold back and who gave people the foundation for their bravery and for their perseverance. And that's the kind of role that churches can play today. Churches have to have principles. They cannot have their finger in the air, seeing which way the wind is blowing, and then moving in that direction, which unfortunately, I hate to say it, is a lot of what we're seeing today.
Yeah. Well,
it's
part of that, when you stand up on those principles, and you did this. I mean, for instance, I know several times you were grilled in committees on Capitol Hill because you took a common sense approach and wouldn't let men into battered women's shelters. And that for that you were grilled, and so a lot of pastors are afraid to preach the Word of God as it pertains to issues of human sexuality for fear of being criticized. We've got to overcome that. We've got to stare that in the face. That's right. We got to stare that in the face and have a greater fear of God than we do of man.
Yeah. Well, look what's happened on the very subject of transgender men now being allowed to play in women's sports. I mean, how ridiculous is that? But if we don't stand up and present the alternatives and talk about what makes sense, it will just get crazier and crazier.
Yeah.
And we won't even recognize our society before long. So that there's the role that the church can play. Put the stake in the ground. Don't allow yourself to be compromised. Let's talk about the issues of family again. We have a situation where one of the groups, Black Lives Matters, says they are against the nuclear patriot-centered family. And, when you have that going on and you're not opposing it, it runs rampant. And
Right.
That's what's happening in our society.
That's a deconstruction of society, basically a deconstruction of Western civilization is what that is.
Yes. And what we found at HUD in partnering with the churches to deal with homelessness, for instance, is that the churches are able to actually develop relationships with people. The government doesn't develop relationships with people. And when somebody has a drug addiction or some emotional issues, that relationship can be the lifeline that will really bring them back again.
Well, it's a holistic
so I think
approach.
There's it's a tremendous liaison that can be had between the government and the church if they recognize it and utilize it correctly.
And I'll reference Luke chapter 18 where Jesus said men always ought to pray and not lose heart. We cannot lose heart in this environment. We must pray and act as the Lord directs us. Dr. Ben Carson, always great to talk with you, and I appreciate your service, and thank you for sticking in there and serving for 4 years in the Trump administration.
Well, believe me, we're going to continue this fight, but we're not going to be nasty about it. We're going to do it the right way.
Absolutely. Speaking the truth in love, and you're welcome anytime here on Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Tony.
All right.
Take care.